Hello and welcome to episode 296 of the Thursday Night Podcast. My name is Brady, joined as always by David. It is draft night, which we are, I can't promise 100%, it's like 95% focused. Got to keep eyes on the draft. We're not going to probably have too much as far as like live commentary on that because that makes for bad podcasting. But David, as a resident Pats fan, I don't know if you... like what the odds are in your head that you're keeping the pick. Obviously, I'm wearing the Falcon shirt, but they don't have a pick as we are talking right now. Right now, what do you think the Patriots do with the pick?
We started recording this after the draft started, and it's already been drunk. So I think if you had asked me like 20 minutes ago, I would have said that it's probably more 60-40 that they keep the pick. If it's going to continue to be this drunk, though, I think that like shoots up to 80. I think there's going to be somebody there who would be a useful player for them in the first round. So, but like it's so late, and I would have to see the board to know. Yeah, obviously there are people that I want, but like sure. Kenyon Sadiq is not going to be there at 31. But
in the realm of possibility, who would you take?
I liked Max Hennichor, the tackle out of Arizona State. I think that's the guy who I've like personally really zeroed in on if he's there. I don't think like he is so much better than other tackles that he couldn't be there. And then Miller, is it Trey Miller, I believe, the tackle from Clemson. I know that there's like he's one of those guys that are just everybody's like, oh, high motor. Oh, he missed only one practice in like all 4 years, and he just seems like the type of guy who sits for a year, because that's probably what New England does if they get a tackle in the first round. Sits for a year, maybe plays some special teams, and then you see him in 2027 and he just takes off, whether that's, taking over for Will Campbell on the left side if he struggles again this year, or is just like, yeah, he's, New England has two anchored right and left tackle for the next foreseeable future. Outside of that, I really feel like they can get an edge, or I don't think the wide receiver that I like in a first round wide receiver is really going to be there. It'd probably surprise me if Casey Concepcion is still there at 31. And I don't like anybody else enough in the first round that I would care, if that makes sense. So I was that 3 players. I think those 3 are if that's who they get, today's a good day.
Yeah, I think Falcons fan of me is hoping Yannicher is there at 48, which there's no shot he is. But I think that the Falcons trade Kyle Pitts and get a pick, and are picking sometime later tonight. That's my that's what I'm putting in the vault, and we can leave the NFL draft talk there for now.
That's right, because we got to come back tomorrow when Ted Hurst gets drafted in the second round.
That's correct. Emergency pod fired up. It still hasn't really like dawned on me how like Ted Hurst has been a locked and loaded day 2 pick for months at this point now, and it's like we are gonna talk about the next time we record the best ever picked Georgia State player in the draft, and it's something we have known. It's not been any kind of every other time, like when Robert Davis got drafted, even in like Penny Hardcycle, Shannon Sullivan, it was kind of like we know Christo Bilikidi set the bar at 189. Is a player going to get past that point, get drafted higher? And now it's a given that Ted is going to be well clear of that, even if he falls to the lower end of where he's projected to go. So we can't lose sight of how cool that is. It's kind of the life that you usually get if you're power conference team, that you have these guys. It's like, oh yeah, this guy's going to go in the first 3 rounds, first 4 rounds. This guy's going to be a first rounder. And you can just like live with that as like the entire year you live with that knowledge. And that's never been the case with a prospect for Georgia State fans until now. And so certainly if you have a team and you're pining for Ted to make that roster, or whether you just are a Ted Hurst and a Georgia State fan, don't miss the moment where Georgia State's name, Ted Hurst's name, gets called on the draft by whoever's doing it. Obviously, Roger Goodell gives up those responsibilities, and so it'll be a random vet or someone. Be a really cool moment and a awesome cap to just the story that he has built for himself the last 2 years, really turning himself into this can't-miss wide receiver prospect that's been like helium on draft boards for the last few months.
And, I think I don't know that we need to turn this into a Ted Hurst podcast, but we could.
That's next week.
You're right.
Have time.
You're right. The thing that has just surprised me every time I've been listening to Draft Talk, independent of Ted Hurst, is just how sure everybody is about. Like they. When teams are mentioning, when the analysts are mentioning day 2 picks, day 3 picks, they're talking about a group of wide receivers. And I think the longest it took someone to get to Ted Hurst and specifically say Georgia State's name was like the 4th one. And that was because this was like a 2-hour, we're going over everybody big board type of podcast, but like the person had several minutes on a Georgia State wide receiver. What? Like, that's crazy. And I know that I think I texted you in a group chat, but I just cannot believe this. Like, and I know that when Georgia State started football, when we went, I think we knew that okay, somebody from this school is going to play in the NFL. Will Lutz was just in the AFC Championship game.
Georgia State has had Albert Wilson made a whole career. And
exactly.
He went undrafted, so it wasn't this type of a journey, and he really carved out a nice role for him on those Chiefs teams. But it wasn't like this. It wasn't like everyone was talking about Albert Wilson for months. It was when he made the roster and just kind of kept working. It's like, oh, this guy's gonna make game day roster. This guy's gonna fill in the slot for them, and just kind of became more and more of a role for himself. Whereas teams are going to draft him with the expectation he's going to be able to start for them right away. Whether they expect him to be the finished product or not. They're going to be penciling him, hopefully, to make game day rosters and be, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, depending on where he lands. And it's that is the new phenomenon. And it's all a credit to what Ted's been able to do and make a name for himself in this whole process. So really excited to see the fruition of that this weekend, wherever he lands, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2 teams. It'd be really cool if he didn't land there. But yeah, that is certainly something we are tracking, ready to go as far as, next week, talking all about it again. I'm sure there'll be some more quotes from him and the team that he's drafted by, just kind of what's the fit there and stuff that we will still be, even as we go into the 2027 football and even to the rest of the John Cremins and Marcilina Grayer era in basketball, still going to be keeping tabs on Ted Hurst, because I think a chance to, even more than what Will Lutz has done, is making some game-winning kicks, make a real impact as a Georgia State alum in the league, which still waiting for that type of huge impact, even though there have been some really good players that have made that jump to the league from Georgia State. This feels like a real opportunity for one of those guys to emerge and be a guy who wore blue and white in Atlanta.
I want to say, I have to fact check this, and this will probably be the last thing on the draft. I want to say, was it Ulrich John, the offensive lineman? Didn't he get a Sunday night game with New England? So he said
he got a ring with New England too.
That he did, but I think he was on the practice squad. But I think they called him up for a game where they. Sure. The point that I'm trying to make is they don't say kicker college. They do say wide receiver college. So hearing Ted Hurst, Georgia State, or something funny on a Sunday night game would be nice. To selfishly say that would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so very soon, probably not that long after you're listening to this podcast, we will know the answer to that, because Friday's day 2, the draft, 2nd and 3rd rounds, feels likely where he is going to be getting picked. And so that's exciting stuff. Also exciting stuff, Georgia State's basketball coaches have been officially announced an event before the football spring game, which we will also get to later. Both coaches kind of all at once, rapid fire. Charlie Cobb and Brian Blake stepped up to the microphone, introduced Marcilina Grayer as the women's basketball head coach. She says a statement. She sits down. They introduce John Cremins as the men's basketball coach. He comes up, does a statement. They all sit down and they just do a wrap. Everyone asking everyone questions at the same time deal. Was the one function of it is nice when these things are a bit more segmented. But I understand completely why. Obviously, with the hires happening, how they did that, they do it all in one, and so. These things are always, you can kind of play bingo with the type of words that'll come up. They wanted, this is from Charlie Cobb, from what he was introducing the coaches. We got the criteria that they were looking for. This is a direct quote from him, is that they wanted energetic coaches committed to playing an aggressive style of basketball. They wanted prior head coaching experience and experience, what he said, navigating the transfer world we all live in, and they wanted, and I thought this was probably the most interesting one of the quotes that he gave there, a plan to recruiting players to a system that suits their abilities rather than someone who would, quote, recruit the stars if they didn't fit the system. So it felt like they went into these interviews maybe trying to avoid some of the pitfalls they just went through with Jonas Hayes, and whether they're admitting this or not, what they went through the first 2 years with Del McGee. And I think it's a bit of more of a stretch when you're talking about Cremins because it is 2 years of junior college a decade ago as far as his head coaching experience, but you got what you're looking for with these two. And I came away a lot, very impressed with Marcilina Grayer and the way that she spoke about it. She even said literally that she felt like Division I has turned into JUCO nowadays with the way the portal is. And so she felt very prepared, had a plan for how she was going to come up to this level and bring players in. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it, I think it's been posted to YouTube now. It's also on ESPN Plus on Archive if you have not, if you have that service. But as much as you can take from these things, and it's really easy to win press conferences, and the next step is winning games. But I think you got a lot of what you were wanting to hear from both coaches. And certainly, I think with more of an unknown for Marcilina Grayer, I came away impressed for sure. And I'm sure that a lot of people who were at the press conference or watching online had the same impression of like, this is someone who knows what they want to do.
I'm glad that she touched on specifically the transition from JUCO to D1 because maybe I'm hallucinating, but I want to say that you kind of mentioned something last week where there is that similar, okay, in JUCO you're going to have to always be replacing your players.
I didn't give her any prep for we just independently arrived at the same point, so.
And it's good that she said that, though.
It's an obvious point for me. If anything,
and
I'm learning.
I think her saying that specifically does kind of answer my why Atlanta, why now question, because I think that this is such a unique job, specifically on the women's side. This is such a unique job if you are somebody who is used to a revolving door on your roster. Like Atlanta, yes, we talk about it with the men in football and basketball and even baseball a little bit, but there is still a lot of women talent here when it comes to basketball. You see it in the, whenever Georgia has the the high school basketball tournaments and the playoffs and stuff like that, you always see some crazy athletes with, UConn, South Carolina has been recruiting them. And if those are the types of schools that are, getting some of the talent that's in Metro Atlanta, obviously Georgia State, maybe not literally everybody, but it is nice when you have somebody who has that experience, because I think the one knock on the Sun Belt the last couple of years is, while yes, it's been very top heavy, a good reason why it's been so top heavy is because the teams are always older. That, like, this year Georgia State maybe not specifically struggled because they were so young, but there were a lot of times where you could tell that they were always missing that veteran presence. And I'm not saying that, Grayer's going to come in and next year's going to be a 25-win team or anything like that. Like, yes, obviously you're still going to need to have some level of roster continuity, but if you have a coach who's used to being able to plug and play different players and is, as long as she is still good and able to scout some of these other players that are around, I think this will be a home run hire, honestly.
Yeah, those are big words, but I think you're looking for that, and so it's easy to kind of see what you want to see there. As far as this team made back-to-back-to-back tournaments in the mid-2000s, hasn't really made any noise since then, and there's no real reason they couldn't, other than just the pieces haven't come together. And this is not a name that was on anyone's board, except the search committees when they came to it, and they did some digging. They watched junior college stuff. There was a deadpan quote from Charlie Cobb that is like, here's a junior college that could probably beat us, watching the tape from Salt Lake Community College, which bold joke to make, but obviously meaning to speak to the quality of the team she was able to put together in Salt Lake. She was also an associate AD there, part of her job. I'm sure that's the case at a lot of these type of places where there's not as many personnel to go around, and so responsibilities fall on your lap that go beyond just head coaching. Not even just like it is with the every coach is doing stuff that isn't basketball nowadays, but to like a literal different job title with different responsibilities you have to fill in for. But that almost makes you feel better about the ability to level up, because probably she's going to lose some things that she did have to deal with that she's not going to have to do anymore. But the idea of someone who has been able to manage a completely full plate before, we know that she's getting into a big role here with a lot she's going to have to manage on a daily basis running a D1 basketball program. And so that was another detail that was brought out by a question that was asked of her that I wasn't aware of. I had missed that in my research, that I thought that was a nice clue to more of why she fit the role. She gave the quote, which probably not that different from most quotes in opening press conferences. Offensively, we're going to push tempo. Defensively, we're going to dictate. Everything is just going to be a new flair to Georgia State. John Cremins on the men's side asked the same question, said it would be an exciting brand of basketball, up-tempo, fast, but a team that's out there and connected together. And none of those are particular, like, yes, everyone says something, some variation of that. If it's a football, we talk about a multiple defense and all the rest of it that goes along with that. But the only note that I would say, and I said this online when someone else brought up, they're just like, yeah, okay, they said this, whatever. What else is new today, ending, and why? They have both a track record of doing that at their last stops. So yes, it was a JUCO 10 years ago for John Cremins. Yes, it was at the junior college level entirely for Marcilina Grayer. But it isn't the same as when you're hiring a Jonas Hayes who hasn't been a head coach before, where it's like you can look back through the annals and see they were able to establish that. You have multiple years where Salt Lake was like plus 15 scoring margin on their opponents. I think one year they dropped 90 points a game over a non-insignificant amount of games. And we already went through on the first John Cremins pod the numbers that his junior college put up. So go back and listen to that episode if you want to. I won't regale everyone again, but you've seen it before, and you saw what James Madison did when he was an assistant on that team. You saw the Vandy team was kind of the same way, and he's talked about it being like a lot that they did at Vandy he wants to transplant to this team at Georgia State. And so, yes, grain of salt, because everyone says a lot of similar things when they're doing these press conferences, and spoiler alert, a lot of people are wrong, and their teams do not do that. But I felt at least there was that history to draw on as far as, yes, it is the thing you say, but it does also, like, they could back it up. We could be a year from now talking about two offenses that are in the top 5, top 3 in the Sun Belt, and it's like, oh yeah, they did what they said they were going to do, and look back and just say, sure, that was the first time that we really got an indication that this is how they wanted to operate, and that is exactly what we saw. And so the proof will ultimately be in the pudding, but that was at least I felt like drawing out a little bit of time talking about, just because that is what they're promising. And it will be a departure in a major way on both sides, but especially on the men's side, given what we've seen this year, where the offense was languishing a good bit.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a little bit different than, say, like Coach McGee, for example, where if you look at Georgia State football and you say, okay, this was a guy who was a running backs coach, on a team who historically has ran the ball really well. It led them to back-to-back national championships, and obviously the defense. And then he gets to Georgia State, and like Georgia State is not just bad at running the football, but like the worst in the country at running the football. But then the press conference, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to be a ground and pound team. We're going to just run a lot of power, a lot of stretch, and then it's like, no, we just sit in the gun and just do like weird options and like crack back tosses and stuff like that,
Everyone gets to judge them on that now. It's like they have said this is what they want to do. And so if a year from now they are not what I just said, if they are like a bottom 5 offense in the league and putting up similar numbers to what these last couple Georgia State teams did offensively, like, you're allowed to say, I'm skeptical now of this hire because this is not what we were promised. But I also was racking my brain. I don't think Jonas talked about it in those terms in his press conference or when he did a little breakaway with us 4 years ago. I remember his quote being something along the lines of like giving players the freedom to make plays, which in hindsight, real red flag quote, because it was the case that there was a lot of freedom given to the players, not that much organization in the way of good offensive sets being given to them. And so it's not even like the most recent case on the basketball side. We got this and it didn't come to be true. I don't think we ever got that quote. Maybe should have been more telling. I want to say we were good podcasters and mentioned it back then, and maybe we're skeptical, but maybe took it on his word. I don't know. I think we were riding pretty high, given how well things had gone, and we hadn't seen...
It was such a good hire, man.
Yeah, it was like we didn't have the idea in our head that it couldn't work out because we hadn't seen a bad Georgia State basketball team since we had been in school. But that's obviously water under the bridge. Not a lot more from that event that I think is worth drawing out. Like I said, the video is online now on YouTube. Good to hear from them in their own words rather than quotes from people or and obviously the chance to ask them questions for the first time, always nice. We've gotten bits of basketball recruiting news here or there. The formation of the guard room has really come together for the men's team. We've got David Thomas, who's previously at Mercer and DePaul and Richmond this past season as a guard. He was a 40% three-point shooter and scored, I think, 11 a game in his freshman year at Mercer. And the numbers have ticked down since then, but a double-digit scorer at the mid-major level, efficient three-point shooter. There will be a theme there to draw out. Jacob Meyer, who Sicko fans will remember, was a freshman at Coastal Carolina a couple years ago. Averaged in the mid-teens for them. I don't have the numbers in front of me, sorry. But was also another 40% three-point shooter then. He also was at DePaul after that. Overlapped with David Thomas, so some familiarity there. Goes to UAB last year, scores 12 a game. So a guy who has averaged double digits 2 of the 3 seasons he has played. And then just recently today, Braylon Barnes, a junior college freshman who just scored 16.8 points a game, averaged 6.3 rebounds a game, 2.8 assists per game at the junior college level. He's a 6'4 guard, but 35% on threes, 81% on free throws, and like I mentioned, just under 3 assists. And so it feels like that's maybe, we still have to really see how the rest of it shakes out, but that feels like a big piece of the foundation as far as the guard rotation is going to go. And feels like a different pieces that maybe fit together, and you've got the continuity with a couple of those guys, but maybe the case that it's not going to be like a dominant point guard that runs everything, but multiple guards that they trust handling the ball and creating their own shot. And so the first glimpse of maybe what the profile of player that John Cremins is going to bring in and how he's going to operate as a recruiter and the types of guys he's going to want to bring in. We had Keeper Jackson, the high schooler, but not a lot to glean from just one, and we just got 3 in a big batch that all feel like they're going to be playing together and kind of mixing and matching together on the court this next season for Georgia State.
Yeah, it's weird because I think it's so early, so it's hard to draw a ton of conclusions. But and we do this all the time because and correctly we do it, but it seems like there's a very clear type here. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that was such a hallmark of those James Madison teams, where it was like, yes, we didn't mention it in the press conference, but Terrence Edwards Jr. was there.
Yes.
Every time Georgia State played James Madison, or I'd watch James Madison, it was like, okay, we're going to focus on Terrence because, best player, Sun Belt player of the year that year, 23-24, I believe. But the rest of their team was capable of handling the ball. Terrence could have been off ball. He's obviously was really good for them, but there were so many other players who, during any sort of possession, would at least touch the ball once. And I'm not saying that this is going to be an offense that everybody's got to touch the rock or, anything like that, but it was just everybody was comfortable doing so. And I don't think you can say that about any of the last Georgia State teams.
Well, I think the biggest pitfall was always like they had DeJuan Odom for the first couple of years, and Micah Tucker, Malachi Brown kind of trading times in the last couple of years. Malachi 2 years ago, Micah joining him this past season. Like there was a trustworthy person they liked to run the offense, and like I said before, like it wasn't always set up for success, so there'd be a lot of dribbling around the perimeter, and then maybe that person has some ingenuity and finds an open guy, and they find some success. There wasn't really a second option all that much. For whatever reason, Ricky Bradley Jr. didn't really get that much run here, despite going on to lead VMI in scoring the year after he left. But when DeJuan left the court the first 2 seasons, there was a lot of like stagnation, not a lot of real idea of how the offense was supposed to operate. Even more than it wasn't a great offensive scheme to begin with, but there was a real drop-off there. I think the idea here is clearly, if just those 3 guys, and it's not going to be the case, make up the ball handling duties, that means one of them's probably going to be off the court. 2 of them could be on the court at the same time, and they can have their own roles next to each other. If all 3 are on the court, they can have their roles together. If just one of the 3 is out there with another group, and maybe they're a little bit bigger, leaning in the to be recruited and committed forwards that are going to be on this team and center, all of those, like, the offense won't look that different. And I think that's what maybe was missing more than anything, is depending on who was out there some of these last couple of years, there was a lot of fluctuation of like what the offense was. And sometimes you'd have lineups out there where it's like 4 guys can shoot threes. Sometimes it'd be like, okay, the defense can sag off literally everyone who's on the court right now because there is not a perimeter threat out here. I think there's going to be a lot less of that, and a lot more fluidity between the different rotations, and a lot more idea paid to how do we keep it going and not be reliant on this guy or this particular, play a certain way when this guy's in, and when he leaves, it's like, what do we do? I think that is the one thing I can glean from this. And I think they're going to keep adding. Maybe they add someone who's more in the guise of a traditional point guard that makes me eat my words a little bit. Maybe they get a freshman in that they want to maybe bring along in that role and who isn't ready for that yet, but is going to be maybe backing up these guys and have his chance over the years. Certainly, if you were looking to be excited about the Atlanta part of the John Cremins name and what he's been able to bring in that front, certainly there's a lot of good point guards in the city of Atlanta playing high school ball right now that if they brought one in, like a 3-star guy, that would be a nice early headline for John Cremins to be able to bring in. I don't know, and we have already gone too far in assuming a lot, given that there's still 2/3 of the roster to be recruited and brought on, but I just think there's a lot we can read into there. And to what you mentioned, however many minutes ago that I started rambling, Terrence Edwards was the leading assist man on that JMU team that went to the tournament, upset Wisconsin, and he had a tick over 3 assists per game. College, you're not going to have guys averaging double-doubles or like averaging in the 5-6 range is like an elite number for college, but they didn't have that type of guy. They didn't have one guy. It was what I was just talking about. It was Terrence Edwards, it was Noah Friedel, and they had bigs that they trusted with the ball. They could run their own sets, kind of run 2-man game. It was a model that we saw, and I think we also saw they did at Vanderbilt this last couple of years, that worked for them to a T. That means you don't need to get a point guard. Or you don't need one guy as the point guard, and I think that could lead to more consistency. Long way of saying all of that. And just kind of more saying, like, yes, I have done research on these past teams, and yes, I have looked into these players that just got recruited. So like I said, you might remember Jacob Meyer. The DePaul factor with Meyer and Thomas seems interesting, and I'm really just, now the next clue, as we're going to keep probably a couple more guards to come in to fill out the rotation, maybe more than a couple, but we still really need to include in on what the front court is going to look like. So that is kind of the biggest lingering question of like the bodies they're going to bring in, the size they want at those positions. And so still fascinated, still a lot of spaces to fill on this roster that we're going to keep learning about.
Yeah, Georgia State, I say this all the time, and it has been a little less true lately, but Georgia State needs to go back to just having one huge big who can just dominate in the post, because it's been a while since they've had a full season of that level of play. And I get it, like, that's hard, obviously, because at a certain point that player is probably going to be playing at a different school. But it's about time that Georgia State is capable of finding bigs who can not get Georgia State killed on the glass. Yeah, and I guess you say big. I kind of think it's possible we see something more like what we saw with Ron Hunter, where like TJ Bickerstaff was the best big on that JMU team. Bickerstaff was 6'9", kind of like Jordan Session. I mean, the different games, but like
whereas Rob Lanier brought in emphasis on size and, I guess Jonas brought in size because you had Christian Beam this year. I think you could see a return to maybe more of the smaller, but not small, and athletic big that can move around and can offer you not just kind of put your back down and man up in the post and do like turnarounds. Like, offers a little bit more, maybe offers a jump shot. So that's my hypothesis. We'll probably be proven right or wrong pretty soon because I think the transfer portal is now closed, so everyone who's in is in, and now it's going to be about everyone kind of figuring out who's going to land where they're going to land. And Georgia State's got a lot of work to do there as the staff continues to fill out getting the front court put together. But I am wondering if it might, again, mirror what they did when they were at JMU and what they did when they were at Vanderbilt.
It's a good time to be a Georgia State fan.
Yeah, it's always this is Hope Springs Eternal, like the basketball version, where like the one side of the portal being what it is the rosters are getting made up every year, and it's not even like it's a unique thing to Georgia State, so it's not like you have to feel bad about it. It's kind of like you're going to learn a lot of new names coming up, and you can, right at this point, before any games have been played, just kind of be like, yeah, this is going to work, and this is why it's going to work, and we hope to provide whatever detail we can on those signings to come to make you believe that and kind of put those thoughts together. But we'll leave basketball for now. Hoping to have a lot more on John Cremins and what he's going to bring on the men's basketball side. I've done a little bit of looking into Marcilina Grayer as well as something they mentioned in the press conference is the players that she has brought up from Salt Lake Community College to be Division I players, and there's already a list there. And so if you're looking for the blueprint for her, it's that she's identified players at the junior college level that eventually got to places like Rutgers and Minnesota in the Big Ten. And so if she's got the eye for that, she can get them to come to Georgia State a lot easier than going to a community college in Utah. So a lot to look forward to as far as that roster coming together, as well as the way we see that get assembled and the style of players she is bringing in as well to her teams. But going to leave it for now. Spring game happened. There's not always all that, there's all these rules about tackling and all, and it's not a complete roster. Del McGee even himself said, like, despite the fact that there is no longer a spring window, he expects there to be movement with teams kind of moving on from players, having those tough conversations after spring. He expects Georgia State to be involved in that as far as adding to what they've already got. I think defensive line is a spot that he mentioned in his remarks before the basketball coaches spoke about where they want to maybe add some more depth. But we got a glimpse again of Cam Brown in his first full spring kind of as the guy. Got a first glimpse of what the defense is going to look like under Cam Clark and John Hanlan. Like a 4-2-5, 3-3-5 is my best guess right now. It just seemed like that. Two middle linebackers kind of manning the middle. Outside linebacker with his hand on the grass sometimes not. So I don't know how much of that is a function of, again, the D-line not being totally there rotation-wise. So maybe guys will be in different roles come the fall when the roster is fully put together. But Team Blue wins 21-14. They're up 21-0 at half and almost let it slip there at the end. But a couple of guys that stood out for me as I just run through my notes. Obviously, Cam Brown is one of them. He had a long rushing touchdown, which you will note is difficult because in these type of things, quarterbacks, if there's someone's breathing near the quarterback, they're going to blow that play dead. He breaks wide open down the middle and gets a score. So you like to see that. I think that inventiveness is going to still be there. The athleticism is going to be there. I think the one note on the quarterback front, other than Cam Brown, is that Aiden Pereira, the Merrimack kid they brought in, feels like a much closer fit to his style to where I don't know that we're going to see him all that much. God forbid we are talking about a quarterback by committee thing again and all that we just dealt with this last fall. But in the event he has to play, I think the offense will look pretty similar to what it looks like how Cam Brown operates it, which is a plus. And also, it's a different style to what TJ Finley was doing entirely, so it's showing a growth of, like, we need to build our roster and our offense around the way this guy and what he does well. We need to bring in a suitable backup who does that as well. So
That right there would fix the quarterback, because it's just one quarterback could not do these things, and then the other quarterback who you clearly want to be your starter could do these things. So with injuries or with poor performance, you're just asking yourself to not gel the offense. So if Pereira is able to kind of be more of a continuation, that might allow Georgia State to be able to play more than one quarterback. I'm not saying that they should, but it should allow them to, if they need to or want to.
Or just, Cameron Brown missed some games with injury this past year. So it's like, if that comes up, you're not going to have a question of like, what is the offense going to look like in this week where it might be Aiden Pereira's turn or his helmet comes off. They're not going to have to. The offense is going to be able to just be the next play. Some craftiness from him, kind of escaping some pressure at times. He was the quarterback that kind of led things for Team White. TJ Stanley was also on Team White. Cam Brown got all the reps for Team Blue at quarterback, so just giving your guy that you think is the starter as many shots at it as possible seems like a point that makes sense. Kyle Washington, a wide receiver, I think has taken some strides. He gets a touchdown. He had another nice sideline catch in a one-on-one battle. One of those touted recruits from the first freshman signing class that he emerged more than anyone else from the pass catching group in this game to me, that I wanted to shout him out as well. Defensively, though,
just real quick,
go ahead.
Can I ask? Totally okay if you don't remember. Was it a back shoulder throw, like trying to throw over a defender, or was it just like in front of a guy down the sideline?
Yeah, it was more like he had to step on the guy. It was
okay.
Maybe he caught it his back shoulder, but it wasn't like a timing route where he came back to it or anything. It was just like throw over the head of everyone and drops in the bucket. Nice catch.
Those are the types of plays that Georgia State's going to need to hit on more, because I feel like, while yes, we started this podcast talking about wide receivers, for a variety of reasons over the last, specifically 2 years, Georgia State has really struggled on being able to kind of work sideline to sideline and doing something like that. So it's a good sign if they have somebody who's maybe not short, but not the tallest wide receiver, being able to go up and get a ball like that.
And the touchdown he was on the inside and just beat his man in the slot. I didn't have tape. I wasn't able to watch instant replay. Just like a quick move, he got a step on a guy. It was open. It was like a slant or like a slant with a double move or whatever. But couple of different looks there shown from him. Not just one sideline play, not just a play over the middle, working in space. It was both. So you like to see that. But defensively were the guys that stood out. I would say probably we didn't get any word on the naming of this is the most outstanding player, but I think the most outstanding player would have been Toby Bolton, Tennessee Tech transfer, and MVP would have been Darius Johnson Jr., who is from Gardner-Webb, another FCS guy coming up. Bolton had 2 interceptions, including the game winner on the final play in the end zone to seal the game. He also had another pass breakup at another point. Darius Johnson, an INT, and a pass breakup. Just early eye test, just good ball hawking defensive back. So I don't know. It was 2 teams that were drafted, and for VIPs on Panther Talk, I went and scoped out all of that I could tell. There was kind of like the core guys on each team, but it was not like the ones versus the ones. So you weren't going to really be able to tell, other than just kind of seeing that guy looks good, he's probably a starter, or knowing Cam Brown's probably the starter. There was not that much you could learn. Still questions about exactly what the offensive line group is going to look like, but basically all the guys they brought in, Kelton Smith, Gage Staniland, Connor Jones, as I'm reading my notes, Jordan Brown, Dalen Hazard, Marcus Maskell, Peter Diaz. Basically all of the transfers they brought in on the offensive line were in the kind of the top 10 that we can tell, because they were in the starting lineups for those 2 teams. And so the first hurdle to clear there was those guys are beating the guys who were here. You're bringing them in to kind of set the bar at offensive line, new offensive line coach Casey Roddick. And so far that seems to be the case. Very little to glean. You really need to still be going full contact when they're playing against other teams in the fall. But that at least is worth something, I think. There's been times, I think that the first year when they brought in that transfer class of receivers in a whole bunch, not a lot of those guys emerged even early on. And so you're seeing more of that now, where it feels like that is going to be the core of that group, is going to be guys they just brought in. That's what they were hoping to do. And so that is my offensive line expert hat quickly being taken off my head, so I don't dwell on that any longer. But stuff to like, I don't really have I don't have much more. Was taking notes a lot of times, so even stuff would like happen and be like, I'm going to note this, but I wasn't really like having a whole lot of second thoughts on what was happening. It would just kind of thing would happen, we'd move on. No ESPN Plus broadcast to refer back to, no replay in the stadium.
It's tough because a lot of what makes somebody a good defensive player are things you're not going to see in a spring game. You know what I mean? Like, you're not running full speed. You're not able to really get into your stance and do some of your, defensive line moves and stuff like that, because obviously you're not going full speed, full strength. So it's kind of interesting because the only people who probably are capable of going out and showcasing some of their talent are the specialists, the defensive backs, the offensive skill position players a little bit. So, but I'm not surprised that some of the things that you're saying have happened. We see a lot of cornerbacks over the years have kind of popped for Georgia State in the spring game and then gone on into the fall and have been, maybe not all Sun Belt types, but have been, part of good defenses, or at least they were not the reason those defenses were weaker. So
and it's a whole new unit. And they did it differently this year. They brought in, basically, the bulk of the guys they brought in at DB were leveling up from the FCS. And guys that already look like they belong on this team, you have to do the caveats of, like, they're going up against the same offense every day, so do they start to have the route patterns down a bit as they're playing against it a lot? Sure, you have to guard against that, and they'll have to be able to show it against teams that they don't have the playbook for on the other side. They don't have it down pat in their head. But there were certain tendencies I liked from those guys that was worth singling out. But that's about it on the spring game side of things. And actually, just on that note, because Dell did speak before, the basketball coaches, he did give a very, I think, telling quote. And again, if you're looking for year 3 is going to be better for a reason other than, like, I want it to, basically. Like, if you're looking for actual tangible evidence that things could be different, it's that strategy I just laid out that they did with bringing in a lot of FCS guys or even lower on the defense. And Dell's exact quote was, I learned my lesson with taking too many Power 4 kids. Last year, a lot of kids were entitled, not appreciative of being here at Georgia State, thought you owed them things. So we were very intentional trying to find guys that were hungry, wired the right way. So, look, like, he does that. He brings in Hainland and Cam Clark, who have coached together before, both of them mostly making their kind of bacon at the FCS level as coordinators, the experience that they've had in that regard, even lower than that in the case of Clark, where he was at Faulkner at NAIA. There is a real bet being made, personnel-wise, coaching-wise, and even along the same lines of promoting guys from in-staff. Zach Conwell's the special teams coordinator. They didn't go out and get a different special teams coordinator. They promoted a guy from within. It's a bet on, like, those things mattering and making a real different choice than they did a year ago. And so, am I here to tell you it's going to work? No, I don't know. But if you were looking for a reason to think that year 3 is going to be better than years 1 and year 2, it's they are making different decisions and voicing why they have made different decisions and saying, we messed this up and we prioritized the wrong things building the roster before. And the great thing about the way the sport is nowadays is everyone's rebuilding the roster, and so there's no guarantee that people who did better than you last year are going to do the same this year. And if you're doing something that if you're changing from what didn't work last year and you're doing something that you think is going to work better, that's a reason to think that it could improve. Time will tell. A lot more practice, stuff to clean up, even guys to add to this roster. But if you're still past skepticism, just looking for any possible reason to think that Del McGee's 3rd season as head coach is going to be better, you can at least look at that and say they are trying something different, and that could mean we're back to competing for a bowl, competing for whatever you hope the goal is for this team in 2026.
Yeah, that hungry quote jumped out at me as well. If there's going to be a change, it really does start there. So we'll see what the results actually look like. It's not often that you see coaches actually admit to something like that. So
yeah, more the game recap, kind of the what happened on Panther Talk, as well as for VIPs, broader notes spelling out a lot of the stuff I just went through. But I mean, I put that up beginning of the week, and you're listening to this podcast on Friday, so you get the news a lot earlier, you get the notes a lot earlier if you're looking on Panther Talk, if you're reading, if you're subscribing as a VIP. Baseball is the last thing to talk about this week. They go 1-for-3 up in Conway against Coastal Carolina. They lose the first two games. They drop the opener on Friday, 15-7. Yikes there. A lot of runs given up. They lose 7-2 on Saturday, the national TV game, going up against former Panther Ross Norman, who is pitching for Coastal Carolina in that game. But they do get the Sunday series finale. They win 11-5. Just Coastal Carolina's third conference loss this season. They dropped to 15-3, and so I'm not trying to sell you on going 1-2 is ever like a successful weekend, but the truth of it is, a lot of Sunbelt teams have had worse weekends than that against Coastal Carolina. In fact, most of them have. So getting a win here, it's not like a moral victory this, a moral victory that. It's just kind of like they exceeded, I think, expectations for this weekend by getting just one. And now you hope they can build on that. They move forward. Didn't have a midweek game this week, but they host Old Dominion. Could be a significant series in where they sit when the conference standings, where they lie after this next set of games in the still pretty jumbled up pack in the middle of the Sun Belt.
And we were asking for just don't get swept, like that's as we transition out of football draft prep, the grind never stops. Technically there will be NBA draft prep before then, but no, there isn't. We'll be talking about a lot of Coastal players if you care about the Major League Baseball draft. So like that makes sense. They're a good team. They've been a good team for basically as long as I can remember knowing anything about college baseball. So yeah, obviously pitching better would have led to a better result this weekend. That's not rocket science. Little annoyed, if you will, that the starting pitching has kind of fallen off a cliff a little bit, especially for some of the guys who you expected to be a little bit better. I think the starters on Friday and Saturday combined, 16 runs given up. Doesn't really matter who you're playing. You can't do that. That's just, you're not going to be able to win many games. Scoring 7 runs you shouldn't score 7 runs and then look like, wow, we were still not very close in this game. I mean, you can even say it for Coastal on Sunday. They scored 5 runs and, you can still say like, wow, Coastal was really not in that game because they allowed 11. So, you really want to find a way to get your pitchers to just get outs. And I know that it's tough. Like we talk about it all the time. College baseball is just kind of the nature of the beast. Like offense reigns supreme. They still use aluminum bats, but you can't have your 2 starting pitchers on the 2 biggest days of the weekend giving up a combined 16 runs. That's just, you're not going to win many games unless you have an offense that's insane.
And they get it done on Sunday. Cole Roberts goes 4 innings, gives up 5. So really just 3 not stellar outings from the starters. You get it. Coastal's got a really good offense, a top 10 team, all the rest of it. But Will Barkowski comes in and gets 5 innings, allows just 1 hit. So a couple of times now he has really saved you as far as going really deep for the guy that's supposed to be kind of your closer, late inning guy. And so I think maybe the fact that he's side armor, you can get some more innings out of him. Certainly a blessing for this team, something they have leaned on now multiple times to get conference wins on the road. The one thing I will say on the offensive side, they score 11, and they played plenty of games in the last 4 or 5 years under Stromdahl where they've scored 11 or more points, and a lot of them were big hit driven and home run driven. And in this one, they score 11, 2 home runs, both solo shots. One for Carter Bailey, one for John Beverly. So, 9 runs there manufacturing against a really good Coastal Carolina pitching staff. That the model that they were hoping for were, yes, they are now, I think, at the bottom of the Sun Belt in home runs as an offense. Like they just totally pivoted from what they were doing well as an offense for the last however many years. But even in these games against the best opponents they will face, they have the chance to win and score a lot of runs doing so. And so you're seeing, if the home run ball wasn't going to be there this game, but you didn't have that to lean on and you didn't have guys that could get you runs in a different way, maybe this is a weekend sweep, because it is against these type of teams that you get a lot less of the mistake pitches and the chances to take opportunities to hit long balls, and you need to work counts, and you need to just have the big explosive inning where you just keep that pitcher on the mound, and they score 6 in the top of the 8th to break the game open and win that one on Sunday. It's like that. You need that to happen, and it's not going to be one pitch, one hit driven all that regularly against the best teams on your schedule. So kind of paying forward the idea of how they put this offense together, getting another top 10 win. So it's a weird year for this team where it feels like last year, kind of below the bar, probably going to have to fight, though it's still possible, to be a winning record by the end of the season. They are now 20-21, 8-10 in the league, so work on both fronts to be above 500, and yet they've beaten 2 top 10 teams on the road this year. So it's like there have still been great successes they can point to. And they go out, they beat Georgia Tech, they beat Coastal Carolina. It is a team capable of really good results, and they got one of them this weekend. They got 2 that were not so great, but they got one that they can hold on to, and maybe it helps them. It's the most recent one that takes them positive momentum going into the next week against the Monarchs of Old Dominion. All right, a lot to get to. I'm sure there's stuff we left on the cutting board because I honestly, maybe we knew because we figured there was going to be at least one basketball coaching change, but crossover season has taken on a whole extra 2 months of life, and that's also because we're still awaiting the Ted Hurst news. So I'm sure that the NFL draft first round is still going to be going on for another couple hours after we hit stop on this recording. There'll be the second, third round tomorrow. As you're listening to this podcast, Ted Hurst is going to have his name called. We will have all that we need to talk about with that when that announcement is made, and the moment, the team, the fit, all the rest of it. And we'll keep tracking the basketball rosters as they get assembled. We'll track the end of the Bus Lot Boys' final season in the Bus Lot as they now host ODU in a pretty pivotal weekend series coming up. But for the meantime, thank you for listening to this episode of the Thursday Night Podcast, and we will catch you next time.